I did it again. I forgot to unmute myself. Isn't that amazing? I looked at this thing and I'm like, what? How come I'm not? Oh, so I've been talking about like for the last, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and you guys haven't heard a single thing I've said. Isn't that awesome? Well, for those people who are going to come watch this video a little bit later, I'm going to edit out the part where I was completely looking like an idiot talking to the camera and nobody could hear anything. And I'm sure I probably have some people, did somebody post in the comments, can't hear you? Yep, mute, see you, can't hear you. Tape a note to your screen. Oh, man. Well, okay, thanks for watching, guys. Sorry about that. Yeah, basically I was just saying, today we got some great news, or we got some good stuff to go through. We got some items. The 737 MAX is back in the news a little bit today. Boeing has kind of made a few statements about things, and we're going to parse that out a little bit. Also, Docker has made an official announcement regarding the Windows WSL 2.0, which means, Windows announced that they got the new Linux kernel that they're building. So that's kind of interesting for us little techies out there. And then the third thing is, it's kind of some good, there's some historical, how can I say this? Like, history has finally acknowledged programming languages. Like, historical societies, let's say, have finally acknowledged a programming language. But it's probably not the programming language you would have thought should be acknowledged as important. So we'll talk about that a little bit today. All right. Now is when I would plan on doing my intro, but since I muted myself before and then did my intro, and then I discovered, hey, Steve, you had yourself muted while the intro was going. I can't really do the intro again, so I'm all discombobulated. Okay, let's just jump into it here, though. So Boeing, let me move this screen over here. So I used to do this thing, and I might do it again, where I would show you guys the article that I'm reading and just kind of like let you guys scroll through it and see it. I don't know if I kind of like this idea a little bit more of me just kind of talking off the cuff to you guys and discussing what I see and what I'm reading here. So I got an article here from Business Insider, and they're talking about how Boeing said that it's using its lessons that it learned from the two 737 MAX planes, troubles that it had. It's trying to use those last two disasters to kind of teach themselves about the problems that they're facing on 777X MAX plane, or 77X plane. I guess they're not calling it a MAX. So Stan Deal, the president of CEO of Boeing Global Services, said that Boeing is looking at what the 737 MAX crashes can teach the company as it deals with engine problems facing its 777X plane. Quote, "We have teams working very closely between 777X and the 737 MAX to make sure that any lessons learned, anything that can be identified that could be applied to the 777X will be applied." Okay, great. What are those things? Are you going to tell us? No, not really. Boeing was looking at absolutely everything it does after the crashes and was looking at it relative to the 777X. Okay, so really, as I'm reading this, like almost every single statement that they put out is about the 777X. Like, it's like they keep reinforcing it. This is one of the things that bothers me sometimes about companies and how they talk about past issues, is that they try to spin it as like, here's this new thing that we're going to be working on. Here's this, let's turn this into an advertising opportunity, right? Like let's turn this bad press into advertising. I get why they do it. They want to change the conversation. They want to move forward. They want to get past the issues. But you can only do that if you sufficiently address the problems, right? You can only move on to the next thing if you sufficiently say, here's where the mistakes were, here's what we're going to do to correct them. And I understand, like, Boeing is in a kind of a tough position here because they've got to do this carefully. They've got a lot of people that died because of their product, the way that they built it. And they can't, the more that they say about what they did wrong, the more liability that they have in court, right? So they can't necessarily just divulge all this information. But you know what? That doesn't matter to the people who lost loved ones, right? Like, this is a heavy thing when people die because of mistakes made by a company. And I can understand why people are really upset with Boeing about how they're not really revealing what went wrong, or the MCAS, but why did it get to this state? How are they going to fix this? What are they going to do? Like, what specifically are these practices that you're going to change? You keep saying that you're looking at everything, you're doing a holistic approach, you're looking at everything to try to figure out a different design process and certification process, but what are those things? Can you give us any specifics here? Because right now, we're at a total loss, and it's not like the FAA. The FAA kind of has a little bit more of a hands-off approach to some of these safety regulations. Like, there's certain requirements, obviously, that the FAA has to do. They do have to do those things. But there's been kind of this hands-off approach a little bit. It's not like the FAA is constantly inspecting everything that's going on at the plants. I think there's even stricter regulations, perhaps, in the actual manufacturing of, like, microchips. Okay, I don't know. Okay, I'm not really in aviation. I'm not right there. I'm not seeing everything, and maybe my impression is completely false. It's very possible, but I just keep seeing this thing, like, looking holistically at our design and certification processes. Okay, looking holistically at your design. Now, my initial opinion on this was they did not go far enough into working with the pilots to figure out what was going on with the plane and thinking about the human factor, right? That's what it is, the human factor that needs to be involved in some of these decisions. And that seems to be what was missing as part of this. And that's been kind of my biggest complaint, is you guys weren't really, what are the pilots supposed to do? You got the system that just overrides anything that they want to do. And that's what caused the problem in the first place. And the only way to fix that a pilot could overrun the system was to turn it off. If you have a system that the only way to make it work is to completely shut it down, that seems like a bit of a design flaw. I'm just saying, I think that's a bit of a design flaw in something that is, carrying something that precious a cargo. You should allow the operators at some level to override the system, because the system could go wrong. And I understand the concern there is, well, you can't, when you reflect on, like, the Malaysia stuff where, pilot decides basically, okay, we're all just going to die, and, like, turns the plane in some odd direction and just flies that out into the ocean. Like, how do you prevent that from happening, right? That's kind of it. Like, how come you guys didn't do more to prevent that kind of thing? Which is a weird criticism to have, in my opinion, because, like, if somebody does something really dumb, somebody does something dumb. You can't design a perfect system that prevents people from doing dumb things. And here you have a situation where it was like MCAS is overriding what people would think that they need to do, what the pilot would think that they would need to do. And it ultimately led to the pilot not being able to do anything about what the plane was doing. And there was no response. Anyway, don't need to get into more of the depths or details of how that all happened, but Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg said in Paris on Sunday that Boeing made a mistake in not communicating that a safety indicator in the 737 MAX planes didn't work, and promised transparency. This statement, I highlighted it here because it's so... It's an indicator to me that they're not addressing the real problem, right? They once again want to go to, it was this device, it was this indicator, it was this some sort of mechanical failure, right? Because if they can blame it on a mechanical failure, then they don't have to take nearly as much responsibility for what happened. Instrumentation fails. That's going to happen. If you don't have some sort of process in place to double check and validate and verify that that indicator was malfunctioning, right? Double check, was that actually how it's supposed to go? That's the process that should take place, right? If you have one instrument and your entire flight system is dependent upon that one system working flawlessly, yeah, that's not necessarily because the indicator broke down. That's because you didn't have the proper systems in place in case it broke down. That's the problem. That's what Boeing needs to fix. And that's not what we're hearing is being fixed. That's my number one criticism of this, okay? And I know this is riling me up a little bit more, and I'm kind of out of my depth in a lot of this stuff. I am not a flight systems engineer, okay? I don't know anything about this stuff other than I'm looking at what's coming out of the company. I've read I've read what people have to say about the incident and the design flaws that came about on the 737 MAX and the MCA system. I know a little bit about this. I've tried to be up to speed on what's going on. And what I'm consistently hearing from the analysis is these are systems that were designed in a particular way to combat what the plane, how the plane performed, and trying to help the pilots along, but overrode what the pilot's input was. Okay? Are you fixing that? Is that what you're fixing? Because that's not what it seems like you guys are targeting. Oh no, this was a mistake of the indicator, and we're going to have more transparency on the malfunctioning indicators. Does that solve the problem? Does that sound to you like Boeing has fixed that issue? Because that doesn't seem like the issue to me. Okay, you fixed a safety indicator. Great. Okay, now that thing fails maybe a little bit less. But what about when it happens again? What about when it does fail? What are the systems that you guys have in place? I just, until I hear something more human factor oriented, we're going to let the pilots have a way of overriding the system. That's what I want to hear, okay? I want to hear how you guys are not going to rely on one instrument to fly your frickin' plane. Do something about figuring that out. That's what I want to hear. And that's not really what we hear. To his credit, he's saying very sorry for the loss of lives. Okay, good. We're all very sorry for the loss of lives. What are you going to do to solve the problem? We understand it was a mechanical failure, but there's more to it than that, and that's what we need to have addressed. All right. That's probably enough of that. I don't know how this thing really riles me up. I think maybe it's just the fact that when I see a large company just kind of ignore the real issue and cut to the chase and say, like, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to fix. When I see just this corporate speak about things and kind of tiptoeing around the real issue, it bothers me. It really does. All right. By the way, what do we got for comments on this so far? Boy, I got a lot of comments. Let me read some of the chat here. Hong Kong, I bet the language is COBOL. Yeah, we'll get to that. And Fortran, yep. Sure, but Monsanto and Johnson & Johnson are getting sued and losing because they do these kinds of cover-ups. Yeah, Monsanto. I know a lot of people go after Monsanto. I don't know enough about that situation. Anyway, well, Bear now, but Agent Orange is Agent Orange. Well, I'll see you later, Steve-O. Gotta go, but I'll be back and watching the recording. Okay, thanks for watching, man. Survivalizer. Good friend of the channel. Okay. Moving on. So the next thing. We actually talked about this a little bit before. New report shows a shakeup amongst top programming languages. So JetBrains released its State of Developer Ecosystem 2019 report. While Java is still the most popular primary language and JavaScript is the most used overall, Python is gaining speed. Yes, Python. Again, that language, the Python language, it is really just becoming a hot language to learn. And I was in this Facebook thread, and somebody was asking about Java. Should they learn Java? Is like their beginner language? What should be their first language that they learn? They're interested in learning Java, and I said, in my comment, I said, yeah, Java's a good language to learn if you're going to be in enterprise, right? If that's where you're going with your career, you want to be an enterprise developer. And a lot of the comments, whenever these threads pop up, there's always this contingent of people that says, you got to learn Python. Python is the thing to go learn, especially for beginners. Like, beginners love Python. And one of the interesting comments that was made about it, because I didn't quite understand, and now I do, it was really helpful when they said this, is Python is a good language to learn because you don't have to do all the setup and understanding of classes and objects and things like that to start with. And it is a little tiny bit of a hurdle when you're learning Java or C# at first, is you got to learn about, the main method, right? The static void main method that is the start of every application. And you have to understand that that's inside of, you don't have to know, but you should know that it's inside of a class, and classes are these ways that we put code in containers. And if it's kind of an initial understanding that you have to have when you're getting started with C# or Java. Whereas Python doesn't have this problem, and really neither does JavaScript. JavaScript doesn't really have that problem. You can work with objects in both Python and JavaScript, but they aren't like the thing that you have to go learn first. And I think that's a good reason, I think, why people are starting to say Python is a better language to start out with as a beginner, because you don't have to do that class object-oriented understanding of things first. You don't have to figure out, well, there's this method that gets called first. Don't worry about the args argument. We'll deal with, we'll deal with that a little bit later. We don't have to deal with any of that when you're doing Python. It's just this REPL, right? It's just read, evaluate, print, loop, right? Over and over and again. And basically JavaScript has kind of the same thing. You can do, JavaScript is basically a REPL. You can go to the console of your browser and just type in JavaScript, and it just starts working just like Python does. So, Python, from that perspective, it makes sense that would be a good beginner language. However, I think that the language itself is a little weird to get used to, and I think it's a lot like BASIC, right? It's a lot like Visual Basic or BASIC. It's just kind of, yes, you can do these things, but the language is so verbose and in English that it does prepare you, and maybe that's why it's a good beginner language too, is it kind of has this structure to it that it's not your typical C-based syntax, right? And maybe that's really my main thing, is just I like the C-based syntaxes, right? I like the C++, the C, the C#. Even JavaScript to a certain extent is C-based. I like that, right? I like the way that it looks, just because the syntax looks, has symbols in it, right? Whereas with Python, you don't have that. It's like all indentation. And it just looks goofy to me. And maybe that's just my aversion. That's why I'm not really so heavy into Python. But hey, if it gets you into programming, by all means, go do it. And obviously, Python is becoming hugely popular. So 7,000 developers worldwide were surveyed. Python is the most studied programming language, the most loved programming language, and the third top primary programming language developers are using. So it's now third, according to JetBrains. Python has surpassed C++ and entered the top 3 programming languages on its TIOBE index. Stack Overflow's developer report found Python was the fastest growing major language and the second most loved language. Using Python, so you use Python for data analysis, web development, machine learning, and also writing automation scripts. And this is kind of interesting that it's getting that automation scripts part 2. So we have, there have been some specs to come in for languages that our partners want some of our students to learn, and one of them was Golang, right? Go, which is Google's language. And Go has a lot of similarities, actually, kind of to the way you do some of these things with Python. But the main reason why they want to Go is because of DevOps, right? Go is becoming one of those DevOps languages. But you can also do a lot of those things in Python. So that's kind of where I think that this is going, is it's almost a battle for that DevOps space between Python and Go. And we'll see who wins that one out, but my suspicion is Python might actually win that one out, especially as Python continues to grow in its popularity. and it just has a larger market share overall, right? It's kind of like how JavaScript became real popular once Node came on, because then you could do everything with JavaScript, right? It's like, I can program anything in JavaScript. And that's kind of where Python, I think probably, you can do a lot of cool stuff with Go, but Python already has like a large part of the market in several different markets. Okay, speaking of Go, Go started out with a share of 8%. So, okay, JetBrains also reported also found that while Go is still a young language, it's the most promising programming language. Go started out with a share of 8% in 2017, and now it has reached 18%. In addition, the biggest number of developers, 13%, choose Go as a language they would like to adopt or migrate to. One other key finding of JetBrains' state of developer ecosystem included 73% of JavaScript developers use TypeScript. 73% of JavaScript developers use TypeScript. I think that all the Java and C# developers are like, yeah, TypeScript. That's probably where that comes from. Okay, so moving on to the next thing, Docker. I told you guys a while back how there was this big announcement. Oh, okay. Thanks for that alert. There was a big announcement by Windows that they're going to do Windows subsystems for Linux, right? The WSL 2.0, which is going to be its own actual Linux kernel. And I said, this has implications for Docker, right? That was one of the first things I said. And if I can find that video, I'll send a link. I'll put a link to it again. You guys can go rewatch that if you want. But that was one of the things that I first immediately identified was, hey, if there's this like Linux kernel running on Windows in a virtual system, I wonder if Docker's probably going to use that. And sure enough, here we have an announcement by Simon Frickel of Docker on Docker Engineering's blog. We have been closely monitoring Windows subsystems for Linux since it was introduced in 2016 to see how we could leverage it for our products. The original WSL was an impressive effort to emulate a Linux kernel on top of Windows, but there are such foundational differences between Windows and Linux that some things were impossible to implement. Docker Desktop developed an alternative solution using Hyper-V, VMs, and Linux Kit. Right, so that's basically the Docker Desktop on Windows. Is you can run Linux containers in a Windows environment, but it's kind of a specialized Hyper-V VM environment. Microsoft has just announced the WSL 2 with a major architecture change. Instead of using emulation, they're actually providing a real Linux kernel. We are very excited about this technology. We are happy to announce that we are working on a new version of Docker Desktop leveraging WSL 2 with a public preview in July. Yes, next month, they're going to release a public preview of Docker that's going to be based on this WSL 2 Linux kernel. Microsoft gave them early builds of WS2 so that they could evaluate the technology, and I highlighted this point that they made in their blog because I think it's, again, an indication of just how much Microsoft understands the ecosystem for developers now. Right? The criticism of Microsoft in the past has always been they're so proprietary, it's either you or us, everybody's against us. You have to, you have to adopt our stuff, our technology in order to work with our operating systems. And anybody else can just go, screw themselves. Nowadays, it's like the complete opposite, and people are still very unsure about this new Microsoft. Right? It's like, I don't know that I trust this. But once again, Microsoft giving Docker early builds of the WSL2 so that they could evaluate the technology, that's an indication they understand the market for developers is in Docker. Right? Docker and containers in general, it's such an improvement to the way that applications can be built. I think that at some point it's just going to be like part of the packaging. Right? At some point, they're just going to start packaging these products as Docker containers, and we're going to get to that state. We really are. Okay, like this Docker layer is almost going to be like built into the operating systems. I think we're going to get to that point. And then you could just run everything basically in its own Hyper-V or, in its own virtual environment. So we will replace the Hyper-V VM we currently use by a WSL2 integration package. So they're going to basically replace. So they're going to be releasing a new version of Docker Desktop that's going to be using the WSL2. That's going to be happening again in July. They're going to be doing a preview. And there's going to be an introduction of a new feature for desktop for Docker Desktop, Linux workspaces. So when using Docker Desktop today, the VM running the daemon is completely opaque. You can interact with the Docker and Kubernetes API from Windows, but you can't run anything within the VM except Docker containers or Kubernetes pods. With WSL2 integration, you will still experience the same seamless integration with Windows, but Linux programs running inside WSL will also be able to do the same. This has a huge impact for developers working on projects targeting a Linux environment or with a build process tailored for Linux. No need for maintaining both Linux and Windows build scripts anymore. Aha! A developer at Docker can now work on the Linux Docker daemon on Windows using the same set of tools and scripts as a developer on Linux machine. Yes, a unification of the tools that developers use. That's what we want. We love unification. All right, Microsoft put a huge amount of effort into performance and resource allocations. We use dynamic memory allocation and can schedule work on all the host CPUs while consuming as little or as much memory as it requires, of course, within the limits of the host. CPU memory intensive tasks such as building a container will run much faster today. For example, the time to start a WSL2 distribution and the Docker daemon after a cold start is within 2 seconds. Okay, on their development laptops. Okay, development laptops. We're talking about like regular, hey, I'm just sitting here on my computer and I'm just working away. 2 seconds. Not some beefed up, server machine that's got like a gajillion gigs of RAM on it. That's an actual term, right? Gajillion. I've seen a gajillion. No, I haven't really. Okay, the time to start a WSL2 distribution is 2 seconds on development laptops compared to tens of seconds in the current version of Docker Desktop. So once again, the technical preview of Docker Desktop for WS2 will be available for download in July. It will run side by side with the current version of Docker Desktop so you can continue to work safely on your existing project. So you can run 2 versions of Docker side by side. Interesting. Okay, so that is that's news. And now for the big reveal. What is the language that is the first programming language to be historically cataloged, I guess you will say? I don't know. I don't know how you say this exactly because it's their first historical marker. Okay, so New Hampshire just put in a historical marker. Those things on the side of the road that, like here in, 1866, this event happened on this site, that kind of thing. So this is the first historical marker that is honoring a programming language. Now, there have been some others about, computers and technology and stuff, but this is the first one that's actually about a computer language, a programming language. And of all the ones that you would think, like to me, the first one that I think of is COBOL, okay? Because COBOL with, Grace Hopper was like the advent of the compiler. That was so huge, right? That was, to me, that was the turning point for programming. That was what made it more widely accessible to everybody. Like you didn't have to be a scientist in order to become a programmer because of COBOL, because of the compiler. So to me, like that's the language I would probably pick. If it was up to me, if I was running one of these historical societies or whatever that determines these markers should go up, that's the one I would say. And I don't know, maybe you've got, I'm interested to hear, what do you think should be the first language to be honored in such a way on a historical marker? Well, the state of New Hampshire decided, the programming language that deserved this honor was BASIC. Yes, BASIC. First historical highway marker honoring computer programming, according to the Concord Monitor, is a new sign honoring BASIC, Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code, a programming language that was invented at Dartmouth College in 1964. And perhaps that's probably why. Maybe, because Dartmouth College, right? It's like, I don't know exactly where Grace Hopper first, invented, COBOL. That may be hard to say, but that's probably more to do with why this is a thing, why it's BASIC, is because it's, hey, New Hampshire, Dartmouth College. That's where it was invented. That's probably the only reason why BASIC got this honor. The sign came about, according to David Brooks from the Concord Monitor, who's a journalist there. Two mathematicians developed the language, John G. Kemeny and Thomas E. Kurtz. BASIC has probably done... Okay, I love this quote. This is almost painful to read. BASIC has probably done more to introduce more people to computer programming than ever created. Do you know your history, sir? Do you know your history? BASIC has probably done more to introduce more people to computer programming than anything ever created. I have a hard time even reading that with a straight face. Are you kidding me? I mean, one of the first languages I learned was Visual Basic. Yes. Okay. Visual Basic was good. I wish that wasn't my first language, and sometimes, sometimes that's not really what I wish I had learned. Matter of fact, it's not actually technically the first language. The first language I did learn was JavaScript. So let me backtrack on that. The first language that I use in a business environment was BASIC. I used JavaScript early on to do a couple of things with websites and stuff. And I actually did get paid for one job doing JavaScript. But, BASIC is, don't get me wrong. BASIC has its place in history, okay? I don't want to discount that entirely. But to say that it has done more to introduce more people to computer programming than anything ever created, again, COBOL. Even if you never learned COBOL, I never learned COBOL, okay? But I understand the importance of what it did to introduce programming to everybody who wasn't a computer scientist, right? Like, you don't have to understand how a computer operates to program one. Why? Because of the compiler, because of Grace Hopper. That's my argument, right? I think I'm well within my rights to say, this is just not accurate, okay? Has done more to introduce more people to computer programming than anything ever created. I'm sure that there's probably some people that could come up with some other languages that they would say is even better than COBOL. I don't know, maybe. Some of the comments on here are just, if I had invented BASIC, I wouldn't want to remember that fact. I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's still kind of funny. C is probably the more ubiquitous language. Like, C has influenced so many different languages that, there's an argument to be made that C++ is maybe more important. I can also, again, COBOL I think is a big one. Fortran is a big one. There's some languages that probably have a good argument to be made about being, done the more to introduce more people to computer programming than ever created. I think there's a few other languages that have better claims to that, to that title than BASIC does. But again, I don't want to shortchange. BASIC has a place, okay? Like, BASIC did, a lot of colleges use BASIC in order to try to explain how programming languages work. And so for that, yes, okay, it's used in a lot of computer science programs, right? It does have a place. But man, that statement is just, man. All right, Francisco Contreras says, you should make some Python tutorials, Steve. Maybe. Python's not really my main language, but yeah, based upon the popularity, it's probably not a bad idea. Kent Dutro says, the weaving machine cards. Yeah. I thought they would be honoring the original language. Yeah. Yeah. I just basic. Ugh. I got no problems with basic. I think basic is good. You know, it's verbose, right? You have to. It's a full language. It's like reading English. It's kind of the way it's designed, is to be like as close to human readable as you can possibly make a programming language, which is fine. Like there's a place for learning with basic. But to make the claim that it is done more than any other language to help people become programming languages or programmers, I don't get it. Okay. Well, all right. That is basically everything I've got for Newsworthy today. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody. I hope to see you guys again tomorrow. Again, 7:30 a.m. every weekday. I do my best to get up out of bed, find some articles to read and talk about, and discuss these things with you guys. So don't forget to join me again tomorrow, 7:30 a.m. Pacific time, by the way. I know some of you guys are in different time zones. So Pacific time, 7:30. I hope to see you guys again tomorrow. If you have anything that you want to talk about, if you have some sort of subject you'd like me to pontificate about, please don't hesitate to drop me a comment in the comment section below, and I will be happy to address it. And again, as far as like what would be the language you guys would pick? You know, if you guys were going to pick a programming language to say is, you know, either should be honored in such a way as to have a historical marker made after it, or whether it's you think that there's one that has a better claim to the throne of having done more for programmers than any other language. I want to hear, what do you think that language is? Is it, is it Python? I don't know. It's a lot. Maybe some people would say Python is starting to, especially just the sheer numbers, right? The sheer numbers of people. I mean, think about that. How many people do you think know BASIC versus how many people do you think know Python? I wonder if those numbers are starting to even out. Just the sheer volume of programmers today, right, versus the number of programmers that have gone through and done BASIC. Even though BASIC is way older than Python, right, way older, it just seems to me like the sheer numbers of people nowadays that are becoming programmers going and learning Python, I don't think Python's reached that level yet. I really don't. C++ probably has a better claim to the number of people that know it more than BASIC. Just the sheer numbers of people that know it. I don't know. Let me know. What do you think the language should be? What do you think it should be? All right. Thank you so much for joining me today, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Monday and rest of your week. Until tomorrow.